Rita Daniels learned early that survival was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, methodical, and invisible. 5 years after her divorce, her life had been reduced to systems, carefully designed routines that left no room for surprise. She woke before dawn, not because she loved mornings, but because fewer people were awake to notice her patterns. She chose grocery hours when aisles were nearly empty. She selected schools that valued privacy over prestige. Every decision was deliberate, stripped of sentiment, guided by one unspoken rule: her son must never be traced back to his father. Hi family, I need you to please help subscribe and watch my video to the end. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Let us continue. The town suited that rule. It was comfortably unremarkable, the kind of middle-class American place where people minded their own business as long as lawns were trimmed and children showed up to school on time. Rita blended easily here. She worked steadily, dressed simply, and kept her history neatly folded away. No one asked who she used to be. No one cared who she had once married. That anonymity had cost her everything, and saved her just as much. 5 years earlier, Rita Daniels had been Rita Bells. The name still felt heavy when it crossed her mind, as though it carried the echo of a life she had outgrown but never fully escaped. Her divorce from Emma Bells had not been loud or public. There were no scandals, no court battles, no bitter headlines. She had not fought for assets or demanded settlements. She had walked away quietly, carrying nothing but documents, a bruised sense of self, and a secret that would change the course of her life. Emma Bells had been powerful long before he had been wealthy. Money had only sharpened what already existed, control wrapped in precision, ambition disguised as stability, affection rationed and conditional. He had not been cruel in obvious ways. That was what made him dangerous to love. Decisions had been made efficiently, logically, always justified as necessary. Rita had been included only after the fact, expected to adjust, expected to be grateful. By the time she realized how small her life had become, she was already disappearing inside it. She had left before anyone noticed the signs of pregnancy. She had left before explanations were demanded. She had left because staying meant surrendering the last version of herself she still recognized. Her son knew none of this. To him, Rita was simply his mother, present, calm, firm when needed, gentle when it mattered. She had raised him with honesty carefully filtered through age-appropriate truths. He knew his father existed in theory, not in form. There were no photographs, no stories passed down, no accidental slips of names. Rita had mastered the art of omission, not out of malice but out of protection. Protection had become her language. Yet even the most controlled life carried risk. Rita understood that every time she stepped outside her carefully drawn boundaries, the world did not pause for her caution. It moved freely, unpredictably, full of intersections she could not foresee. On an ordinary morning that should have remained ordinary, those boundaries began to fracture. The market was busy in the way public spaces always were, voices overlapping, movement constant, anonymity assumed. Rita navigated it with practiced awareness, her attention divided between lists and surroundings, between her son's small hand in hers and the exits she always noted without thinking. She did not see Emma at first. Recognition came not as shock but as a tightening, an instinctive awareness that something long buried had shifted. Emma Bells did not announce himself. He never had. He existed with a contained presence, older now, sharper in ways time only refined. His success was not loud. It settled into his posture, his expression, the way he occupied space without asking permission. 5 years had changed him, but not enough. The past did not rush at Rita in dramatic waves. It pressed in quietly, insistently, the way memory always did when it was least welcome. Her body reacted before her mind caught up, muscles stiffening, breath shallow, steps faltering just long enough to matter. Emma noticed her then. There was no immediate recognition on his face, just a pause, a narrowing of attention. the sense that something familiar had surfaced without context. Rita felt it immediately, the way attention sharpened when curiosity replaced indifference. Then his gaze shifted. Not to her face but lower, to the child standing beside her. The resemblance was not obvious, no dramatic mirror of features, but something in the timing, the proximity, the way Rita's composure fractured by degrees too small for anyone else to notice. Emma was not a man who missed patterns. He had built his life on reading what others overlooked. Rita felt the moment slip from her control. She moved before questions could form, before recognition could sharpen into certainty. Her exit was abrupt enough to register, controlled enough to avoid spectacle. Her heart pounded with the knowledge she had worked 5 years to avoid. The past had found her without trying. As she disappeared into the crowd, Rita understood with devastating clarity that hiding had never been about distance alone. It had been about time, and time, she now knew, had run out. Rita did not stop walking until the market sounds dulled behind her, until the noise thinned into something she could breathe through. Her pace remained measured, her posture intact, but inside her body everything had accelerated. She had trained herself for moments like this, unexpected variables, sudden shifts, but training did not erase consequence. It only delayed panic long enough for action to take over. Her son sensed the change before she acknowledged it. Children always did. He tightened his grip briefly, then loosened it when she steadied him with a reassuring presence she had perfected over years of quiet vigilance. She guided him toward the car without urgency, without drama, without the slightest hint that the world they had built together had just been punctured. When the doors closed and the engine started, Rita allowed herself one controlled breath, then another. She did not look back. The drive home passed in fragments. Traffic lights blurred into routine markers she had followed for years. Familiar streets offered no comfort now. Her mind replayed the moment in precise detail, not emotionally, but analytically. Emma's posture, the delay in his recognition, the shift in his attention, the pause that came too late to mean nothing. She had known this day could come. She had simply believed distance and time would dull the odds into insignificance. At home, Rita moved through the remainder of the day with mechanical discipline. Lunch was prepared, homework supervised, evening rituals completed. Her son remained blissfully unaware of the recalibration already taking place in her mind. When he finally slept, she sat alone in the dim quiet of the living room and confronted the truth she could no longer avoid. Emma Bells had seen them. Across town, Emma stood in the same market long after Rita disappeared from view. He had not followed her. He had not called out. Those impulses belonged to men who acted on instinct rather than calculation. Emma had outgrown that version of himself. Instead, he observed what remained, the empty space where recognition had nearly settled, the faint disruption of routine that lingered like an unresolved equation. He told himself it was nothing. An old face surfaced by coincidence, a woman who resembled someone he once knew. The mind, he understood, was skilled at manufacturing patterns where none existed, yet the dismissal felt incomplete. Something resisted closure. Emma had spent the last 5 years refining efficiency. His life had become streamlined, free of emotional variables that complicated focus. The divorce had not destroyed him. It had clarified him. He had assumed Rita's departure was an act of pride, perhaps resentment. He had not chased answers because chasing implied loss of control, and he had never allowed himself to operate from that position. Now control felt subtly compromised. The child stayed with him long after the market emptied. Not the child's face, but the timing, the mathematics of it. 5 years since the divorce. A child old enough to align with that departure. Emma did not jump to conclusions. He had never built anything substantial on assumption, but he cataloged information instinctively, the way other people breathed. That night his apartment felt unfamiliar, not luxurious, not empty, just insufficiently distracting. He reviewed schedules, answered correspondence, signed documents without absorbing content. The discipline that once anchored him now highlighted the intrusion he could not fully dismiss. He slept lightly, waking before dawn, with the sense that something unresolved had entered his life without permission. Rita slept even less. She replayed the encounter repeatedly, searching for reassurance she could not logically supply. Had Emma recognized her immediately? Had he noticed the resemblance or merely the disruption of her composure? She evaluated her own reactions with clinical honesty. She had moved too quickly, left too abruptly, confirmed suspicion through avoidance rather than invisibility. By morning, fear gave way to resolve. Rita understood Emma better than anyone ever had, including himself. He would not act impulsively. He would not confront her without certainty. He would investigate quietly, methodically, confident that truth revealed itself to those patient enough to wait. That knowledge did not comfort her. It sharpened her urgency. She reviewed her life as though from the outside. Records were clean. Employment history ordinary. Addresses changed just enough to avoid traceable continuity. Her son's documents reflected only her name. She had planned meticulously for the possibility of exposure, even if she had hoped never to test those preparations. Still, preparation did not account for proximity. The following days passed with unsettling normalcy. No calls, no unexpected appearances, no subtle inquiries that reached her ears. The absence of movement frightened her more than pursuit would have. Silence had always been Emma's most effective tool. Across the city, Emma initiated nothing overt. He resumed routines with deliberate care, watching for internal resistance rather than external confirmation. When none came, he allowed curiosity to justify minimal inquiry. Not about Rita directly, about timing, about records adjacent to her absence. The approach was cautious, almost academic. He discovered nothing definitive, which, paradoxically, unsettled him further. Emma was accustomed to clarity. Problems yielded to pressure or patience. This did neither. Instead, the question lingered, gaining weight through restraint. He found himself recalling details he had once dismissed: the abruptness of Rita's departure, the lack of negotiation, the refusal of financial compensation. At the time, he had interpreted those choices as pride. Now, alternative explanations presented themselves uninvited. The idea that Rita had left to protect something, someone, altered the narrative entirely. Rita felt the shift before evidence confirmed it. The air around her routine seemed heavier, as though observation had replaced coincidence. She did not allow panic to dictate behavior. Panic created patterns. Instead, she reinforced normalcy, trusting consistency over concealment. Yet beneath that discipline, something else stirred, an awareness she resisted numbing. Emma's presence, even at a distance, reactivated a part of her she had locked away. Not longing, not regret, but recognition. The undeniable pull of a history shaped by intensity rather than tenderness. That recognition angered her more than fear ever could. The encounter had not reopened wounds she believed healed. It had exposed scars she had learned to live around. Rita understood now that avoidance alone would not protect what mattered most. The past had acknowledged her existence. It would not retreat simply because she wished it would. As the week drew to a close, both Rita and Emma arrived at the same unspoken conclusion from opposite directions. What had occurred at the market was not an ending. It was an interruption, one that demanded resolution, whether either of them was ready to face it or not. The space between them, once defined by distance and silence, had narrowed into something far more dangerous: attention. And attention, once focused, rarely looked away without answers. Attention, once engaged, altered Emma Bell's internal order. It did not distract him from work. It sharpened his focus in ways that bordered on obsession. He had always trusted instinct, but never without verification. What unsettled him now was not the possibility of coincidence, but the precision with which the moment at the market aligned with details he had long dismissed as irrelevant. Rita Daniels had never been impulsive. That had been one of her defining traits during their marriage. Every decision she made carried intention beneath restraint. Remembering that, Emma could not reconcile her abrupt exit with casual surprise. Her reaction had been defensive, protective, and that distinction mattered. He began with timelines. 5 years since the divorce. 5 years since Rita vanished from his immediate sphere. The math alone did not confirm anything, but it narrowed possibilities. Emma had spent his life reducing chaos into patterns and patterns into leverage. He approached this no differently. No emotional indulgence. No assumptions. Just data. He reviewed records that had once belonged to shared life logistics, addresses that ended abruptly, employment changes that coincided too neatly with their separation. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious, but there was a consistency to the erasures. Rita had not simply left, she had reorganized her existence with purpose. That realization shifted something fundamental. Emma had once believed she left to reclaim pride. Now he considered the alternative, that she had left to protect something fragile, something time-sensitive, something that required distance from him specifically. The thought irritated him not because it implied deception, but because it suggested he had been blind to consequences he now understood too late. He did not initiate contact. Reaching out without certainty would weaken his position, and Emma did not operate from weakness. Instead, he observed quietly. He allowed curiosity to unfold naturally, monitoring not Rita directly but the environment around her absence. Schools, community records, public footprints that people assumed invisible. Every path led to partial confirmation, without conclusion. Rita, meanwhile, felt the pressure of unseen scrutiny settle into her days like an approaching storm. Nothing happened. That was the problem. Emma had always moved this way, slow, deliberate, allowing others to exhaust themselves in anticipation. She recognized the pattern immediately, and recognition bred exhaustion. Her body remembered him in ways her mind resented. Not physically, not sentimentally, but structurally. Emma's presence had always demanded adjustment. Being near him meant existing within his gravitational field, where even resistance required energy. Rita had spent 5 years reclaiming that energy, rebuilding herself into someone whose life no longer bent around another person's will. Now that balance wavered. She reviewed contingencies she had hoped never to activate, legal documentation, custodial safeguards. She did not fear losing her son through force. Emma was not reckless. What she feared was negotiation, measured, strategic, dressed as reason. He excelled at making control appear collaborative. Rita had escaped that once. She would not underestimate it again. Her son remained the axis around which everything turned. He thrived in the stability she had constructed, unaware that his existence had become the silent center of an unfolding recalculation. Rita watched him with a mixture of pride and unease, acutely aware that his resemblance to Emma would sharpen with age, with mannerisms, with expressions that could not be coached out of him. Time, once her ally, was becoming neutral. Emma's investigation deepened without escalating. He avoided private surveillance, avoided tactics that could be interpreted as intrusion. Instead, he relied on access that already existed, professional networks, public systems, patterns others ignored. What he uncovered did not provide certainty, but it provided enough absence to justify concern. Rita Daniels' life had been intentionally narrowed. That narrowing implied motive. The more Emma observed, the more his certainty solidified, not about facts, but about her reasons. Rita had not left him because she stopped loving him. She had left because loving him had required surrender. And surrender, he now recognized, was not something she had ever been built for. The child re-entered his thoughts with unsettling frequency. Not as possession, not even immediately as responsibility, but as implication. If the child was his, and Emma was no longer convincing himself that the idea was absurd, then his past behavior carried weight he had never been forced to measure. Absence became a variable with consequences rather than convenience. That realization disturbed him more than any accusation could have. Rita sensed the narrowing distance without visible proof. She began to feel observed not through presence but through probability. Emma's attention had always been quiet when most dangerous. She resisted the urge to relocate again. Movement now would signal fear. Fear would confirm suspicion. Instead, she held her ground. Her restraint was not passive. It was calculated. Rita understood that confrontation would come, but only when Emma believed he held enough clarity to control the outcome. She prepared herself not to react emotionally when that moment arrived. Emotional reactions had once been her vulnerability. She would not offer them again freely. What unsettled her was not the prospect of truth surfacing. It was the memory of how easily Emma could reassert influence simply by being present. The pull between them had never been about romance. It had been about gravity, two people bound by intensity rather than compatibility. She had broken free once. The question that haunted her now was whether freedom could survive exposure. As days folded into weeks, both Emma and Rita arrived independently at the same conclusion. Silence had reached its limit. Suspicion, once contained, demanded either confirmation or release. Neither of them was prepared to let it dissolve unanswered. The path forward would not be dramatic, it would be precise, controlled, and irreversible. Whatever truth existed between them no longer belonged to the past. It was active, moving, and waiting for the moment it could no longer be avoided. The shift Rita sensed did not announce itself through action. It arrived as pressure, subtle, accumulating, unavoidable. The absence of contact had hardened into certainty. Emma Bells was no longer questioning whether something existed between past and present. He was measuring how to reach it without resistance. Rita recognized that phase intimately. It was the same phase that had once defined their marriage, the calm before decisions were made for her. She did not wait for confirmation. Waiting had never served her well. Her fear was not explosive. It was disciplined, channeled into observation and self-command. She watched her own reactions the way she once monitored Emma's moods, alert to shifts that could betray vulnerability. Fear, she knew, was not the enemy. Confusion was. She refused to give him that advantage. Yet restraint did not erase memory. At night, when the house settled into silence and her son slept without dreams complicated by adult consequence, Rita's mind returned to the life she had dismantled. Not nostalgically, precisely. She examined it the way one studies a structure that collapsed, not to mourn it, but to understand where the faults had been hidden. The early years of her marriage to Emma had not been unhappy in conventional terms. Stability had been abundant, security unquestioned. From the outside, their union had looked enviable, controlled, polished, efficient. What it had lacked was not affection but space. Rita's needs had not been denied outright. They had simply been postponed, deprioritized, absorbed into larger plans that never quite included her voice. Emma had never raised his hand, never shouted, never demanded submission explicitly. He had simply expected alignment. His expectations had been articulated as logic, his preferences framed as inevitability. Over time, Rita had learned to anticipate rather than express, to adapt rather than insist. Her life had narrowed quietly, politely, until she no longer recognized the edges of it. The pregnancy had not been a rupture, it had been a revelation. She had realized then with startling clarity that the future Emma envisioned did not account for her autonomy or her child. Love, she understood too late, was not enough when it required erasure to sustain. Leaving had not been an act of rebellion, it had been preservation. Now preservation felt threatened again. Rita moved through her days with intensified awareness. She noted unfamiliar cars in familiar spaces. She recalculated routines not to flee but to maintain control over exposure. She did not shield her son excessively. That would invite curiosity. Instead, she reinforced normalcy, trusting that stability itself was a form of defense. Still, reality pressed closer. Emma's restraint unsettled her more than confrontation would have. She understood that his silence was not hesitation, it was strategy. He was allowing time to reveal what pressure could not. And time, she knew, favored those who believed they were entitled to answers. Her memories of him sharpened, not softened, with distance. She remembered the weight of his attention, the way it could feel both affirming and consuming. She remembered how easily desire had been mistaken for connection, how intensity had substituted for intimacy. Those memories did not weaken her resolve. They clarified it. Across the city, Emma revisited his own past with similar precision. He did not indulge regret. Regret implied passivity, and he had never been passive. What he experienced instead was reassessment. He reviewed his marriage not as a failed relationship, but as a system that had functioned according to assumptions he had never questioned. Rita's departure, once framed as emotional volatility, now appeared as consequence. The realization was not comfortable. Emma recognized patterns he had long considered strengths: decisiveness, control, certainty, and acknowledged their cost. He had not noticed Rita shrinking because he had mistaken her compliance for agreement. That blindness unsettled him more than the possibility of deception ever could. The child remained the unresolved variable. Emma resisted numbing the truth outright, not because he doubted it, but because numbing it would force action. And action, once taken, would alter lives that had adapted without him. That awareness slowed him, not out of fear, but out of an unfamiliar sense of responsibility. Rita felt the convergence coming. Her fear evolved, not into panic but into clarity. She accepted that confrontation was inevitable. What mattered now was not avoidance, but framing. She would not allow the narrative to be rewritten without her consent. She would not allow her son's existence to be absorbed into Emma's world as an extension of his influence. The past had shaped them both, but it would not define the terms of what came next. In moments of quiet reflection, Rita acknowledged the complexity of her own emotions. The attraction she once felt had not vanished with divorce. It had transformed, hardened by memory and restraint. She did not confuse that attraction with trust. She knew better now. Desire without safety was not intimacy. It was exposure. Her resolve settled into something firm and unyielding. Emma, meanwhile, reached the limits of observation. Patterns had emerged. Absence had spoken. Silence had confirmed what instinct first suggested. He did not yet move toward Rita directly, but the decision to do so had been made. The only remaining variable was timing. Both of them understood, without communication, that the equilibrium they had maintained since the market encounter could not hold. Fear had yielded to reality. Reality demanded reckoning. What Rita feared most was not losing control. It was being forced to relive a version of herself she had worked 5 years to outgrow. And what Emma began to fear, quietly, reluctantly, was that reclaiming the truth might cost him more than ignorance ever had. The space between them, once managed through distance and denial, was now defined by inevitability. And inevitability neither of them could outrun. The moment arrived without drama, without announcement, without witnesses. That, more than anything, defined how Emma Bells operated when certainty finally replaced suspicion. He did not ambush Rita. He did not force proximity. He created inevitability. Rita felt it before it happened. It came as a subtle disruption in routine, a narrowing of options, a sense that paths once open had quietly closed. Not through intimidation, but through presence. Emma had always known how to position himself where avoidance became impractical without appearing aggressive. It was a skill honed in boardrooms and negotiations, now applied with unsettling familiarity. When they occupied the same space again, it was not accidental. Rita did not freeze. She did not retreat. Her body reacted with tension, not fear. She had anticipated this moment too long to allow surprise the upper hand. Still, the weight of his attention pressed against her in ways memory had not prepared her for. Emma's presence was unchanged in essence, contained, controlled, quietly overwhelming. Time had refined him, not softened him. He did not begin with accusation. Emma observed first Rita's posture, the way her awareness sharpened, the instinctive recalibration she performed when proximity reduced her margin of control. These were not the reactions of a woman merely revisiting a past relationship. They were the responses of someone protecting a living truth. The question, when it came, was not delivered as confrontation. It was measured, precise, and impossible to deflect. Rita understood immediately that evasion was no longer viable. She had lived 5 years in disciplined concealment, but concealment depended on uncertainty. Emma no longer carried uncertainty. His restraint had not been hesitation, it had been preparation. And now, preparation demanded resolution. Rita did not deny it. Denial would have insulted both of them. The truth surfaced quietly, without spectacle or emotional collapse. There was no relief in speaking it aloud, only release from the strain of maintaining silence. The child was his. The words did not feel dramatic as they settled into the space between them. They felt inevitable, long overdue, and irreversible. Emma absorbed the truth without visible reaction. Shock registered not through expression, but through stillness. The confirmation restructured his internal order with swift brutality. Assumption hardened into reality, possibility into consequence. The absence he had justified as mutual detachment transformed instantly into abdication. What unsettled him most was not that Rita had hidden the child. It was that she had been right to believe she needed to. Emma's mind recalculated years with ruthless efficiency. The divorce, the timing, her refusal of financial leverage, the clean severing of shared life infrastructure. None of it had been impulsive. Rita had not fled recklessly. She had executed an exit strategy with singular focus. The realization bruised his ego more deeply than anger ever could. Rita watched the shift occur in real time. She recognized it, the subtle fracture of certainty, the reorientation of power. Emma was not furious. He was confronted. That distinction mattered. Anger would have been easier to manage. This was heavier. She felt no triumph in revealing the truth, only fatigue. The burden of secrecy had shaped her life, but it had also been a shield. Now that shield lay dismantled and Rita stood fully exposed, not emotionally, but structurally. The truth altered not just their relationship, but the balance she had fought to maintain for 5 years. Emma did not demand access. That restraint surprised even him. Instead, responsibility surfaced where entitlement might once have lived. He recognized with uncharacteristic clarity that his absence had not been neutral. It had been enabled by his own emotional distance, his assumption that control equaled stability. The truth did not accuse him aloud. It indicted him silently. Rita sensed the shift in him and did not trust it blindly. Change, she knew, was not proven by realization alone. Emma had always been capable of understanding consequences intellectually. The question was whether understanding would translate into relinquishing control rather than reasserting it under a new name. Their shared history hovered between them, charged with unresolved intensity. The attraction that once bound them had not disappeared. It had matured into something sharper, more dangerous. Rita felt it despite herself, the awareness of him as a man who still knew how to draw her attention without touching her, without speaking. She did not confuse that pull with safety. She had learned that lesson already. Emma, for the first time since the divorce, understood the scale of what he had lost, not Rita alone, but the right to claim innocence in his own absence. The child was not a bargaining chip, not a possession, not a symbol of legacy. The child was proof of a life that had continued deliberately without him. The truth did not explode between them. It settled. And in that settling, both of them understood that nothing would return to how it had been. Not the past, not the present, and not the future they would now be forced to renegotiate. What had been hidden was no longer hidden. What followed would not be about revelation, but about power, and who was willing to relinquish it first. Truth altered the terrain, but it did not equalize it. The moment Emma Bells knew the child existed, the architecture of power between them shifted, not dramatically, not explosively, but undeniably. Power did not announce itself. It manifested in options, access, and assumptions. Emma had always possessed those in abundance. Rita had survived by limiting their reach. Now, those limits were under threat. Emma's instinct to involve himself activated immediately, not as impulse but as strategy. Responsibility to him was not abstract. It required structure, presence, and authority. He did not frame his interest as intrusion. He framed it as obligation. That distinction, while logical to him, ignited every alarm Rita had built her life around. She did not mistake his restraint for surrender. Emma's world operated on leverage, legal, financial, institutional. He understood systems intimately, and systems favored those who knew how to move within them. Rita had constructed her independence deliberately outside those systems, not because she lacked access, but because access came with conditions she refused to accept. Their conflict did not unfold through confrontation. It unfolded through proximity and recalibration. Emma's attention began to touch every corner of her carefully maintained order: school choices, medical oversight, long-term planning. Each inquiry was reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a framework that implied shared authority. Rita recognized the pattern immediately. Control rarely arrived fully formed. It arrived incrementally, disguised as care. She resisted without dramatics. Rita did not forbid involvement outright. Absolutes invited challenge. Instead, she asserted boundaries with clarity and consistency. Her life, she made evident, was not provisional. Her son's stability was not negotiable. Emma's resources did not entitle him to authorship over a world he had not helped build. That refusal unsettled him. For the first time in his adult life, Emma encountered a situation where influence could not be accelerated. Money did not dissolve resistance. Expertise did not override autonomy. Rita did not argue emotionally, nor did she yield strategically. She held her ground with quiet resolve, making it clear that cooperation would exist only on terms that preserved her independence. Emma struggled against instincts shaped by years of command. He wanted to solve the problem efficiently, to consolidate variables, streamline decision-making, reduce risk. Rita's resistance forced him into unfamiliar territory, patience without control. The distinction between care and dominance blurred uncomfortably, and for the first time he questioned where one ended and the other began. The child complicated everything. Emma observed from a measured distance, noting details that stirred something unfamiliar in him. The boy's mannerisms, his quiet confidence, his easy attachment to Rita's presence. This was not an extension of Emma's world. It was a world that existed independently, whole and complete without him. That realization humbled him in ways professional setbacks never had. Rita watched Emma closely, alert to shifts that signaled entitlement. She knew he was capable of restraint. What she needed to see was whether restraint could endure frustration. Power tested itself when denied, not when indulged. Her own internal conflict deepened. Emma's proximity reawakened a physical awareness she had buried beneath discipline. It was not nostalgia. It was recognition of a connection forged through intensity rather than safety. She felt it in moments of shared silence, in the gravity of his attention when it lingered just long enough to be felt. Rita did not act on it. She acknowledged it privately, refusing to let desire masquerade as reconciliation. She had learned that lesson at great cost. Emma, too, confronted impulses he could not immediately justify. His attraction to Rita had never been passive. It had been consuming, sharpened by admiration and frustration in equal measure. Now, layered with responsibility, it threatened to distort judgment. He forced himself to slow down, to separate longing from legitimacy. The imbalance between them was undeniable. Emma possessed influence that could reshape their circumstances overnight. Rita possessed something he did not, complete trust from the child at the center of it all. That asymmetry mattered more than either of them admitted aloud. Legal considerations hovered unspoken but understood. Emma knew the systems available to him. Rita knew how easily those systems could erode autonomy under the guise of fairness. Their restraint around the subject was mutual and strategic. Neither wanted escalation, yet both understood escalation remained an option. Rita made her position unmistakable. Access would be earned through consistency, not asserted through entitlement. Presence would be granted gradually, not demanded immediately. Any attempt to leverage power would sever what fragile cooperation existed between them. Emma listened. Not passively, intentionally. For the first time, he recognized that control would not secure what he wanted. It would only confirm Rita's original decision to leave. If he intended to be part of his child's life in any meaningful way, he would have to operate without dominance, an unfamiliar, uncomfortable adjustment. The power imbalance did not disappear, but it shifted. What remained between them was not resolution, but tension, charged, restrained, unresolved. A tension that extended beyond logistics into something more intimate and dangerous. Neither acted on it. Both felt it, and both understood that desire unchecked could collapse the fragile structure they were attempting to build. This phase of their reconnection was not about love. It was about restraint. And restraint, for two people accustomed to intensity, demanded more discipline than either of them had ever been forced to exercise before. Time had become the only variable Emma could rely on. He arrived consistently but not intrusively. He did not demand access to routines or attempt to rewrite her life with generosity disguised as authority. Instead, he existed at the edges of their shared reality, careful, patient, and measured. This was unfamiliar territory for him. Control had always been immediate, tangible, and decisive. Now, it required endurance. Rita noticed. She noticed the small patterns before the gestures themselves. The subtle shift in Emma's approach was evident in the absence of overt direction, in the way he lingered just enough to be present without intruding. She resisted the temptation to interpret it as proof of transformation. 5 years of absence had taught her the danger of assumption. She remained vigilant. Her son, too, remained the center of their orbit, unaware of the tension swirling around him. Emma observed interactions with quiet scrutiny, nodding the way Rita guided, protected, and shaped the boy's environment without fanfare. She had rebuilt a life in which the child thrived independently of him, and the recognition of that reality unsettled him more profoundly than any argument ever could. The attraction between them, long dormant, pulsed beneath the surface. It was not spoken, nor did it require articulation. It existed in the way proximity created awareness, the shift of a gaze, the alignment of bodies in the same room, the gravity of attention in shared silence. Neither acted on it, yet both felt its presence with sharp clarity. Emma's attempts at redemption were incremental. He offered gestures of support without expectation. He listened without judgment. He respected boundaries she had drawn with years of disciplined foresight. Each act was deliberate, designed to demonstrate that he could contribute without reclaiming dominance. Rita processed each gesture with measured caution. She evaluated intent, consistency, and reliability. Trust, she had learned, could not be demanded. It had to be earned, and history had shown that patterns often repeated under stress. She remained aware of the fragility underlying Emma's apparent restraint, and she refused to mistake it for certainty of character. Their interactions were charged with unspoken tension. Desire, though present, was moderated by awareness of consequence. The potential for intimacy existed, but both understood that acting on it prematurely would destabilize the precarious balance of respect and control. The tension was electric yet disciplined, a test of endurance rather than immediate gratification. Emma grappled with internal conflict. His usual certainty was challenged by Rita's resilience. He had expected resistance, but not a steadfastness that demanded recalibration of approach. The child's attachment to Rita further complicated his perception of influence. The boy's independence from him highlighted the years lost, emphasizing that reconciliation would require more than gestures. It demanded change. Rita's internal awareness mirrored this complexity. She was conscious of the emotional weight Emma carried, aware of the unspoken efforts he made to respect boundaries. Yet she did not soften automatically. Past wounds were neither ignored nor diminished by the passage of time. Healing required observation, proof, and the demonstration that change was not situational but enduring. This dynamic established the slow-burn rhythm of their renewed connection. Each encounter, each shared moment, layered tension over possibility. Redemption was not immediate, and neither could pretend it would be. Both operated under the recognition that history could inform, but not dictate, the future. The child remained blissfully unaware of the emotional choreography surrounding him. He navigated the space with natural confidence, observing patterns but not reading intent. His existence emphasized the stakes for both adults, how their actions, presence, and restraint would shape not only relationships between them, but also the developmental environment around him. Emma learned the subtleties of influence without assertion. He adapted to patience, discovering the discomfort of presence without command. Rita demonstrated vigilance without paranoia, resilience without retreat. Together, they navigated a delicate equilibrium in which boundaries were respected and trust incrementally tested. What neither could ignore was the underlying reality. Attraction persisted, desire lingered, and emotional intensity had not dissipated with absence. Both understood the necessity of discipline, of restraint, and of measured action. Redemption, Emma realized, would not be automatic. It required consistency, patience, and proof that he could respect autonomy without undermining it. Rita acknowledged the complexity of her own reactions. Awareness of past intensity did not translate into vulnerability. She recognized the pull between familiarity and caution, between desire and principle. Every moment reinforced the necessity of observing behavior over responding to impulse. By the end of this phase, both had arrived at a mutual unspoken understanding. The journey toward trust and reconciliation would be deliberate, slow, and contingent. Neither could assume forgiveness, nor could they ignore the magnetic intensity between them. What they could do was act consistently, honor boundaries, and navigate the delicate interplay of proximity, attention, and emotional transparency. The equilibrium established in this act did not resolve the past. It did not guarantee future alignment, but it laid the foundation for engagement under conditions of respect, restraint, and accountability. Redemption was in progress, measured, and uncertain, yet undeniable. Emma Bell's world had always moved in predictable patterns: markets, boards, partnerships, and carefully cultivated influence. But the subtle entanglement with Rita Daniels and her son introduced variables that no structure could fully anticipate. Unlike controlled environments, the outside world did not pause for reconciliation, and forces beyond their personal calculations began to exert pressure. Business partners, advisors, and family members, all accustomed to immediate results, noticed the shift in Emma's focus. Subtle questions arose. Why had he diverted attention to matters outside corporate or financial imperatives? Why did he linger longer in unexpected meetings? They could not see Rita, but they understood when a man of his precision allowed personal concerns to ripple through his schedule. Their interventions were tactical, dressed as advice but underlined with expectation. Emma absorbed it without outward reaction, but internally, he calculated every risk. Rita experienced parallel pressures, though differently. She felt the currents in her community and household, not explicit challenges, but subtle forces designed to observe, measure, and test her autonomy. Even ordinary interactions, once predictable, became layered with potential exposure. Friends and acquaintances asked casual questions about schedules, routines, and activities. None knew Emma's presence was a factor. Rita had no illusions that ordinary curiosity would not collide with extraordinary circumstance. The tension between them, once contained within deliberate restraint, now interfaced with external expectation. The equilibrium they had built in private became visible through context. Emma could not shield Rita from attention entirely, nor could she act in isolation without risk. Their connection, though carefully measured, existed in a space increasingly defined by public awareness and scrutiny. Legal implications hovered silently. Emma, aware of custody frameworks and parental rights, recognized that inaction carried risk. He had the resources, influence, and knowledge to assert claims if desired, but doing so would compromise the fragile trust developing between them. He was forced to navigate an unprecedented situation, engagement without dominance, presence without pressure. Each decision required meticulous consideration. The potential for misstep was high. Rita, acutely aware of what Emma represented, maintained vigilance over each interaction. Boundaries had been established to protect autonomy and prevent coercion, yet the subtle encroachment of external forces tested her resilience. She could predict patterns, anticipate inquiries, and limit exposure, but not entirely. Outside pressure was systemic, layered, and continuous, and it demanded more than strategy. It demanded endurance. The child, still unaware of the underlying dynamics, became the unifying axis around which decisions revolved. His welfare remained the undeniable priority. Both Emma and Rita measured every choice against its effect on him. Disruption could not be allowed. Compromise, where possible, was tactical rather than voluntary. The external forces amplified the stakes, reminding both of the long-term consequences of failure or misjudgment. Emma observed Rita's methods and strategies with keen attention. She had anticipated exposure, defended against it, and maintained composure under circumstances that might have destabilized others. Recognition of her foresight deepened his understanding of her resilience and the complexity of her independence. It also reinforced the necessity for him to act with patience and consistency. Any misstep could undo months of careful progress. Rita, in turn, assessed Emma's approach to the external environment. He responded with deliberate caution, balancing accountability with deference. His presence now carried influence without overt imposition. It was a new dynamic, one that neither of them had previously navigated. The tension, subtle and constant, reminded them both of history while shaping the trajectory of engagement. Moments of shared observation became tests of trust. Emma would support quietly, offering resources when necessary, without asserting entitlement. Rita would permit involvement selectively, ensuring the child's environment remained stable. Both adjusted continually, responding to a system neither fully controlled. It was a delicate dance, requiring precision, timing, and mutual recognition of boundaries. Desire persisted beneath this structured interaction. Not expressed overtly, but present in the charged attention they maintained toward one another. Proximity, shared responsibility, and unspoken awareness created subtle tension, reinforcing the complexity of the connection. Neither acted on it, aware that premature engagement could compromise the equilibrium they were cultivating. As external forces pressed in, from advisors questioning priorities, from community observation, and from latent societal assumptions, the pair maintained a delicate balance. It was an ongoing negotiation between presence and distance, control and respect, desire and restraint. They learned to coexist within the pressure without surrendering agency or disrupting the fragile trust that had begun to form. By the conclusion of this phase, both Emma and Rita recognized the stakes extended beyond their personal concerns. Outside pressure demanded vigilance, awareness, and consistency. Misalignment could threaten the careful structures of trust and autonomy painstakingly rebuilt. They had to act with precision, endurance, and attention to nuance, understanding that every choice, small or significant, resonated beyond their immediate intentions. The outside world would not wait for reconciliation. And neither could they. Emma Bell's world had always moved in predictable patterns: markets, boards, partnerships, and carefully cultivated influence. But the subtle entanglement with Rita Daniels and her son introduced variables that no structure could fully anticipate. Unlike controlled environments, the outside world did not pause for reconciliation, and forces beyond their personal calculations began to exert pressure. Business partners, advisors, and family members, all accustomed to immediate results, noticed the shift in Emma's focus. Subtle questions arose. Why had he diverted attention to matters outside corporate or financial imperatives? Why did he linger longer in unexpected meetings? They could not see Rita, but they understood when a man of his precision allowed personal concerns to ripple through his schedule. Their interventions were tactical, dressed as advice but underlined with expectation. Emma absorbed it without outward reaction, but internally, he calculated every risk. Rita experienced parallel pressures, though differently. She felt the currents in her community and household, not explicit challenges, but subtle forces designed to observe, measure, and test her autonomy. Even ordinary interactions, once predictable, became layered with potential exposure. Friends and acquaintances asked casual questions about schedules, routines, and activities. None knew Emma's presence was a factor. Rita had no illusions that ordinary curiosity would not collide with extraordinary circumstance. The tension between them, once contained within deliberate restraint, now interfaced with external expectation. The equilibrium they had built in private became visible through context. Emma could not shield Rita from attention entirely, nor could she act in isolation without risk. Their connection, though carefully measured, existed in a space increasingly defined by public awareness and scrutiny. Legal implications hovered silently. Emma, aware of custody frameworks and parental rights, recognized that inaction carried risk. He had the resources, influence, and knowledge to assert claims if desired, but doing so would compromise the fragile trust developing between them. He was forced to navigate an unprecedented situation: engagement without dominance, presence without pressure. Each decision required meticulous consideration. The potential for misstep was high. Rita, acutely aware of what Emma represented, maintained vigilance over each interaction. Boundaries had been established to protect autonomy and prevent coercion, yet the subtle encroachment of external forces tested her resilience. She could predict patterns, anticipate inquiries, and limit exposure, but not entirely. Outside pressure was systemic, layered, and continuous, and it demanded more than strategy. It demanded endurance. The child, still unaware of the underlying dynamics, became the unifying axis around which decisions revolved. His welfare remained the undeniable priority. Both Emma and Rita measured every choice against its effect on him. Disruption could not be allowed. Compromise, where possible, was tactical rather than voluntary. The external forces amplified the stakes, reminding both of the long-term consequences of failure or misjudgment. Emma observed Rita's methods and strategies with keen attention. She had anticipated exposure, defended against it, and maintained composure under circumstances that might have destabilized others. Recognition of her foresight deepened his understanding of her resilience and the complexity of her independence. It also reinforced the necessity for him to act with patience and consistency. Any misstep could undo months of careful progress. Rita, in turn, assessed Emma's approach to the external environment. He responded with deliberate caution, balancing accountability with deference. His presence now carried influence without overt imposition. It was a new dynamic, one that neither of them had previously navigated. The tension, subtle and constant, reminded them both of history while shaping the trajectory of engagement. Moments of shared observation became tests of trust. Emma would support quietly, offering resources when necessary, without asserting entitlement. Rita would permit involvement selectively, ensuring the child's environment remained stable. Both adjusted continually, responding to a system neither fully controlled. It was a delicate dance, requiring precision, timing, and mutual recognition of boundaries. Desire persisted beneath this structured interaction. Not expressed overtly, but present in the charged attention they maintained toward one another. Proximity, shared responsibility, and unspoken awareness created subtle tension, reinforcing the complexity of the connection. Neither acted on it, aware that premature engagement could compromise the equilibrium they were cultivating. As external forces pressed in, from advisors questioning priorities, from community observation, and from latent societal assumptions, the pair maintained a delicate balance. It was an ongoing negotiation between presence and distance, control and respect, desire and restraint. They learned to coexist within the pressure without surrendering agency or disrupting the fragile trust that had begun to form. By the conclusion of this phase, both Emma and Rita recognized the stakes extended beyond their personal concerns. Outside pressure demanded vigilance, awareness, and consistency. Misalignment could threaten the careful structures of trust and autonomy painstakingly rebuilt. They had to act with precision, endurance, and attention to nuance, understanding that every choice, small or significant, resonated beyond their immediate intentions. The outside world would not wait for reconciliation. And neither could they. The past had closed quietly, leaving only decisions and consequences in its wake. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sweeping gestures, no easy resolution. What remained was a shared recognition of reality, lives intertwined by history, responsibility, and love for a child, but also defined by independence, boundaries, and respect. Emma Bells approached the new dynamic with caution. He had learned that influence could not replace trust, wealth could not substitute for respect, presence could not erase absence. The child, his son, was central to this reckoning. Participation in his life required more than acknowledgement. It demanded patience, consistency, and acceptance of boundaries set by Rita Daniels. Rita observed, evaluated, and adjusted her own expectations. She had spent 5 years creating a world that protected her son and herself. She would not relinquish that world simply because Emma returned. Independence was not optional, it was survival. Yet, she recognized his genuine attempt to engage without domination. That recognition did not erase history, but it allowed for collaboration. Their co-parenting became the framework for this new reality. Decisions were shared when necessary, but boundaries were respected. Emma contributed without controlling, observed without interfering, and offered support without obligation. Rita maintained autonomy, preserving routines and structure she had established while integrating him into spaces where his presence could be constructive. Desire and tension remained, though carefully moderated. Neither acted impulsively. They acknowledged the magnetic pull of past intensity but allowed restraint to define engagement. Physical proximity, shared responsibility, and quiet attention became a language of connection without possession. Trust was rebuilt slowly, through action rather than words, and mutual accountability replaced entitlement. External pressures, which had once threatened disruption, now served as context rather than conflict. Emma and Rita navigated scrutiny with subtle coordination, shielding the child from unnecessary intrusion. They operated in parallel, aligned by intention rather than impulse, understanding that the child's stability was non-negotiable. Over time, the relationship matured into something neither could have predicted during the height of their past intensity. There was no romantic resolution in the conventional sense. There was no reclaiming of what was lost. What emerged was a negotiated family structure, respectful, deliberate, grounded in reality rather than fantasy. Emma earned access to his child's life through consistency and presence rather than assertion. Rita maintained her independence while allowing collaboration in areas that enhanced her son's well-being. The child became the axis of this reconstructed family. His needs, preferences, and growth guided interactions and established parameters. Emma learned to prioritize engagement over influence, participation over authority, and presence over possession. Rita learned to balance vigilance with trust, discipline with flexibility, and independence with cooperation. There was recognition of attraction, lingering intensity, and unspoken history. But these factors existed alongside practicality, caution, and respect. Emotional connection was acknowledged without expectation, intimacy without obligation, and care without control. Both had grown through the trials of separation, absence, and revelation, and they applied that growth to the framework they now inhabited. By the end, the definition of family had shifted. It was not a return to the past, nor a surrender to passion. It was a carefully constructed reality in which autonomy, trust, and mutual accountability coexisted. Emma's role was earned, deliberate, and ongoing. Rita's independence was preserved and respected. The child's welfare was central, uninterrupted by adult history. Their story did not conclude with a conventional closure. There was no fairy tale reunion, no permanent reconciliation, no guaranteed future. Instead, there was choice, conscious, deliberate, and grounded in reality. They chose engagement over estrangement, collaboration over dominance, and honesty over assumption. Trust, once fractured, began to rebuild. Respect, once absent, became structural. And love, tempered by history and discipline, found its place without possession. The past remained, but it no longer dictated the present. The future was theirs to navigate, not predetermined, not idealized, but real. A family had been defined not by circumstance alone, but by deliberate action, mutual respect, and the conscious decision to coexist while honoring autonomy. It was a conclusion earned, grounded, and enduring.